Hello, my name is John Didi, professor of political science at the community colleges of Baltimore County and local media political analyst. Welcome to the Maryland State Politics and Government podcast on Substack. Today, I am talking with Maryland State Senator Charles Sydnor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on. I like to have legislative leaders on to talk about stuff instead of citizens just shooting off their mouth. What is your number one goal for this session?
Boy, that's a hard question because there's so many very important things going on. Um, being in Baltimore County and seeing some of the things that I've seen with regards to redistricting and voting. Certainly, my voting rights bill is a primary piece of legislation that I want to help to get across the line. And it stems from the 2021 redistricting in Baltimore County, where I happen to be one of the plaintiffs that sued Baltimore County for its initial drawing of lines that we were able to successfully sue in federal court to enjoin the initial map, forcing the county to redraw a constitutional map. Uh, what I learned last year was that the county council did not seem to have learned its lesson, and it engaged in some redrawing of boundaries that once again looked as if they were going to run afoul of the Voting Rights Act. And the lesson I learned from my initial uh, run at this was that, but for the organizations that were out there that were willing to take our case on, uh, plaintiffs would have been left without a real recourse unless they could really afford to hire attorneys to litigate for their civil rights. So the legislation that I had introduced would have empowered the attorney general to sue on citizens' behalf when local and county governments ran afoul of the Voting Rights Act. So last year we were finally able to get it out of the Senate, but unfortunately it didn't get out the House. But I have a fabulous House sponsor, Greg Wims out of Montgomery County, and we fully expect that we're going to be able to get this thing out of the General Assembly and onto the governor's desk.
Glad you raised the issue of voting rights because voting rights has been so much under attack. People after 1965 kind of the sigh of relief, we're in good shape. But we've seen what the Supreme Court has done, and Justice Roberts, who never saw a Voting Rights Act he didn't want to declare unconstitutional. Why do you feel there's been such a change, especially the last 10 years, with the Supreme Court, with Justice Roberts? One of his decisions a few years ago was along the issue of gerrymandering. He kind of just punted the thing and said, whatever the states want to do, that's fine. What's going on? I just don't understand why people just can't get aboard with some voting rights.
It's a good question. I think from some of the writings and things that I've read, there's a contingent of people who are out there that believe that they're just not needed anymore, and that the types of discrimination that were meant to be remedied by the 1965 Act have been remedied. Uh, and the fact of the matter is that the truth is it's not true. Um, these things, the reason it wasn't happening was because of the Voting Rights Act and because of pre-clearance and those things that kind of checked and kept at bay some of the worst intended types of mechanisms that some of the states wanted to put forth. Uh, Fortunately, here in Maryland, we haven't had things to the extreme that they may have had in other southern states, but that does not mean that these types of violations were not happening here in the state of Maryland. Outside of Baltimore County, there were cases, I think, in Caroline County as well as I think Wacomico County, where uh, voting right the ACLU of Maryland and local NAACP chapters had been successful at challenging some of the voting schemes that were placed in those counties. And the fact of the matter was, and one of the reasons why I championed this legislation is the federal government, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division wasn't going to come into Maryland and save the locals. They had larger fish to fry. But for these organizations really taking it on to organize uh, citizens and to help the citizens to understand their rights and find counsel, uh, I think we really have been up the creek, and those violations would have continued to happen. So with this legislation, we'll have an attorney general who, if things are happening in the counties, we'll be able to turn to and say, look, we think this is what's going on. Take a look. So I find it extremely important, voting rights.
One of the issues I think about with voting rights that kind of centers on it is the problem of gerrymandering. We have seen this nationally. We've seen what Texas, California, what Maryland's kind of looking at a little bit, but the overall idea that we've become more politically divided as we've created these gerrymandered districts that just win the primary, be far left or far right, and then breathe a sigh of relief after the primary. How, first of all, what do you think can be done to kind of fix some of this gerrymandering problem? And second, how do you feel about the legislation currently being proposed in the House that basically redraw the congressional districts as they are and have that new map?
Hmm. If I may take the second question first. I have been a strong supporter of Senate President Bill Ferguson and the position that he's taken. Um, what I've said is after being in Baltimore County and seeing what our county council attempted to do to its minority resident populations, I could not be a hypocrite then at uh, in the state and try to act as though there were no Republicans in the state of Maryland. The fact of the matter is, the Republicans think statewide you're talking about a 28 or the mid 20% range, and they deserve an opportunity to attempt to elect someone of their choice as well. Um, and it's if we didn't like what was done and what the president has been asking Texas to do and many of these other states, then the question becomes, then why should you become what you don't like? Um, as I've spoken to some residents, and some may push back on this, but the way I've tried to characterize it is I'm not going to be an Old Testament type actor. I'd rather be a New Testament actor. An eye for an eye is going to leave everyone blind. I'd rather treat folk like I want to be treated. And in Baltimore County, I've tried to make certain that our county council is treated its citizens like I'd want to be treated. And then to go out and then be in the position that I'm in and try to silence people who may have different views than me. I just didn't feel that was the comfortable that wasn't the right thing to do.
You talked about silencing views, and it kind of gets into my next question. How do you feel about what's been going on nationally and the concerns locally regarding the federal government and what's going on with ICE?
You know, I say thank God for federalism and the ability for states to uh, uh, do some of the things that we need them to do, stepping into the breach. Just last night or yesterday afternoon, we had an opportunity on second reader to to discuss two pieces of immigration laws. One looking to ban 287G agreements here in the state of Maryland, and another bill that sought to or that seeks to uh, regulate the wearing of masks by law enforcement officers, including those in ICE. And the reality is, we are not living in uh, the kind of times that we're used to. Things are very, very different. And when you have a federal government that is acting as if the Constitution is a suggestion rather than the law, you have to find ways to act. I think the pushback by my Republican colleagues with the uh, facial masking bill is the supremacy clause. Well, my response to that is, let's pass it anyway and let the courts figure it out. There's no federal law that says you're preempted from passing a masking bill. There's no right for the Department of Homeland Security to say that their officers should be masked. So let's let it play out in the courts. Right now, these are not normal times. We should not have citizens nor those residents living in the state of Maryland or anywhere in this country fearful of people, masked, armed people coming in and arresting them. I think what it does is it leaves too many people vulnerable, too many people subject to being killed. Because I will tell you, there are people out here who are armed and wearing. And if someone who claims to be an ICE agent comes up on one of them and grabs them, they could possibly be killed, and that's concerning to me. And one could see where someone could legitimately put forth a right to self-defense argument because they didn't know what they were or who they were. Law enforcement all the time talks about split-second decisions. Well, if you're, like I said, if you're wearing and carrying a gun and someone comes up masked and you have no idea who they are, you just know that you're being attacked, you have that gun for a reason, and that's your safety. So, uh, what they're doing is unthinkable, and it takes, and this is where states have to step up and protect their citizens. And this was one way that we could do it, but really, what I like that I'm seeing out of places like Minnesota and cities like Philadelphia, the way you stop it, you have state's attorneys that will say, if you come into our state and you violate the law, we will prosecute you. Trump cannot protect federal agents who are breaking the law from state's attorneys who are willing to enforce state law. So we want them to follow the law. We don't want them abducting people. We don't want them engaged in unlawful arrest, or we don't want them engaged in any other type of unlawful conduct. And so we need our state's attorneys to step up and be a bit more vocal about uh, prosecuting those who intend to violate our laws.
You make a lot of very good points because I'm a white guy in the suburbs, and that terrifies me. As far as if a masked
It
person
should
came to my
terrorize
house at 9 o'clock
everybody.
at night.
It should terrorize everybody. I mean, I've heard women who have who are terrorized, and honestly, um, it it almost people like to talk about Gestapo and everything happening over and that happened in Nazi Germany. I mean, I think a more apropos uh, comparison is fugitive slave laws, where you got these slave catchers going out across the country even into states that where slavery wasn't recognized, and just kidnapping people. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that was the crux of the movie 12 Years a Slave. You had a free man who was kidnapped and sold into slavery. So now you have people who are not the worst of the worst as it was sold to us, just trying to live their lives being taken by the government. You have citizens who are speaking up and their rights are then being trampled on. I mean, it's a scary time.
Thing that I find frustrating is they're very good at getting in the blue states, but a lot of our crops in red states, we haven't seen ICE actually go into Topeka, Kansas or Omaha and say, let's round up the agricultural workers.
Yeah.
And I think that's where and I think a lot of other citizens have a problem with the fact that you're picking and choosing, and that's
Oh,
troubling.
you're absolutely right. That is what's happening. And the thing about being um, a nation that is supposed to be governed by laws, really, that sort of thing should not be happening. Um, Law should be enforced uniformly. That's why it's the law. Unfortunately, again, we know that in this country, that's not always how it happens. So things that can once seem very benign can have disparate impact on certain communities. And I mean, we look at in the housing arena, and guess what they want to do? They want to get rid of disparate impact. So I mean, so they can be allowed to just do what they want to do and not be held accountable to how things are being enforced. It can be overwhelming, but I always think back that, my ancestors, they went through slavery. They went through Reconstruction, and I'm here today as a testament to them. So and we'll continue pushing back where we can push back, and I'm just hoping that people see it for what it is, I'm just hoping that there's an awakening, and that people then use the authority and the power that they have to ensure that um, a message is sent that this is unacceptable in these United States. Taking us back to your initial question and my initial answer, of all the bills that I have, which is voting rights. It comes down to being able to express your voice in a nonviolent fashion that we have, and that's how we do it here in the United States. So that's how we have done it, and I'm hoping we continue to do it here in the United States.
Final question I want to ask, and I've appreciated the time you've taken today. This discussion's been fascinating. Is what should citizens do as far as someone who says, I'm really concerned about this, or I disagree with what's going on here? What advice would you give citizens to say and be able to give their voice to the fact that they disagree with these policies?
I know it sounds almost contrite to say keep reaching out to your legislators, uh, but I will tell you, it gives you a shot in the arm when you know that people are out there and they're paying attention, and they recognize that when you're voicing concern, that they feel as though you're speaking for them. Um, Make certain that your neighbors are registered, and really educate yourself. I think far too long we've had voters going to the ballots not necessarily fully understanding everything that's going on, um, and 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 making choices that may not always be in their best interest. Um, and so it's not only about voting, but it's about going to uh, the ballot box as an educated voter and really understanding the issues. that you're voting on and how they may affect you and your community. Um, if you have questions, legislators should not be inaccessible. We should be able to answer questions, and answers may be, you know what? That's a good question. I don't know. Let me see if I can find the answer out for you. That's an answer, but they should be accessible and at least able to communicate something, because we're privy to some things that are happening, and things are constantly happening extremely fast. And I'll say most of us that are down here, and this goes across this is a nonpartisan statement. We're all trying to do good for our community and what we believe is best for our community. And that's one of the things that I can appreciate about working with my colleagues here in the General Assembly, even the ones that I may not always agree with. I think we're trying to do what we believe is best for Marylanders. Um, but really, many of them, sometimes you just wish that they would speak up a bit more about the things that they're seeing this man in the White House doing today that we all know flies flatly in the face of our Constitution and this country's traditions.
Thank you very much for your time, Senator. I appreciate everything you're doing in Annapolis and the comments you had today.
Thank you.